In that 1 month, it validated, do not build this. I am not the right person to build this. I have no joy building this. Right at the end of that, someone, very close friend of mine, was showing me something that he's been building. And that sparked so much joy in my heart again. And it gave me the inspiration for the version of HypeDocs that I'm working on today.
Hello, and welcome back to Off to the Valley, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of entrepreneurs and innovators who are reshaping industries around the world. I'm your host, Prateek Panda, and today we are thrilled to be joined by Aashni Shah, the founder and CEO of HypeDocs, an AI powered platform designed to help users track their personal and professional achievements and goals. Ashni's journey from Nairobi, Kenya, to becoming an influential entrepreneur in the tech industry is nothing short of inspiring. After studying computer science at the University of Toronto, Ashni worked as a software engineer for established companies like Microsoft and Square before founding HypeDocs. Today, Ashni is on a mission to bridge the gap in the job market for women and minorities, providing them with the tools they need to confidently ask for promotions and raises that they deserve. Ashni, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to After the Valley.
Thanks so much, Pratik, and happy to be here. Hello to everyone that's tuning in.
Great. So I have a lot of questions. Of course, we'll learn more about Hype Docs, but before we get to that, tell us a little bit about Ashni as a person. What was your childhood like? If any of that played an influence in getting you to where you are.
Oof, that we might need more than half an hour for this. I would love to say I had a really positive childhood and upbringing. I was born and grew up in Kenya. If you are seeing a video of me, I don't look Kenyan, I look Indian because my ancestors are from India. But our family immigrated to Kenya 4 generations ago, and my
Oh,
parents are still there, and they run a family business. So it's my dad and his brothers, and it was started by my grandpa, my dad's dad. So my childhood was amazing in terms of I had lots of family to support me. I made lots of friends. I went to some great schools. But especially with this entrepreneurial path that I'm on today, I think I always knew I was going to end up on this journey somehow because that's what my dad does. That's what my uncles do. And we have a group of businesses in Kenya. So, if you don't have interest in one specific type of company, we had so many others that you could kind of hop between and learn so much. And I think that's been one of the bigger influences in my life is I was given these incredible opportunities from a young age to be part of these big businesses, learn from not just my dad but my uncles, and as my elder cousins have joined the business, learn from them as well.
that's great. Were those also tech businesses or no? Okay.
No, they're actually the opposite of tech businesses. They're very much brick and mortar. One of them's a mall with some hotels. Another one is an auto industry, or it's in the auto industry. There's one that's lighting, so very much not tech friendly. And in the last sort of year or so, I've actually started working with the family business in my free time because as founders, we have so much free time. And it's been fun. And I'm helping lead a technical team that our entire job is to go and build out or implement or integrate into other platforms that exist to see how we can sort of bring them out of spreadsheets and into really powerful tools to just to make their everyday lives better and maybe spin some of those up into our own tech products down the future.
That's great. The reason I asked is I almost guessed it might be a traditional business because it's been running for a few generations. And there's an interesting trend going on, even in the tech community. There are many people who are talking about boring businesses, as they call it. And there is, a fair sense of learning and accomplishment there as well. And I want to know more about what encouraged you to take the tech founder path versus sort of expanding on what your family knew already and maybe you got an experience on, and why did you not decide to? I don't like calling it boring businesses, but that's the terminology that people are going for. But what got you excited about tech?
Yeah. I think the boring businesses is where the money is right now. So you're completely hitting the nail on the head there. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. In terms of my journey and how I ended up here, when I was younger, I wanted to be a lawyer. I should probably be very honest and say my dad wanted me to be a lawyer and I didn't object. So for a very long time, I was preparing myself for that. And then coming into about ninth grade or eighth grade, I just got very into coding as an eighth grader, which is very abnormal for an Indian girl in Kenya, but it is what it is. That's when I started getting very into the tech world as well. I try to believe I'm pretty good at looking into the future, or like my instincts are good about noticing trends. So, as an eighth grader, ninth grader, trying to figure out what I want to do in university, I worked backwards and was like, what courses do I need to take in high school to qualify for university programs? From that, I was like, I have two options. I can either go down this law path or I can go down the computer science path. And because I wanted to come to North America with both of those, to do law, you have to do undergrad. A lot of people do your sort of traditional political science or pre law as your undergrad. And I said, no, let me do computer science. Let me get this technical knowledge. And if I'm still interested in law after that, I can go into law with a very strong technical background because guess what? By the time I graduate, we're going to need lawyers that understand how tech works. We still need lawyers that understand how tech works. So I'm really glad to see that panned out. But when I entered university and I started meeting other people, I started coding, I started problem solving, and then just working in the industry after graduation, I felt I'd found my people. I felt very seen in terms of these are people I can get on with very well. We think a lot of the same ways in terms of like we like problem solving, we love board games, we're that kind of people. We're not necessarily the out clubbing kind of person. Not that there's anything wrong with them. I just in my childhood I tried to fit into that crowd and it just wasn't me. So it just felt like I'd found the people I belonged with. And the idea or the notion of law slipped further and further away. I think I was also always struggled with law because I would want the financial security of working at a big law firm, but I'd want to work on things that made the heart feel good, whether it's like social justice or things like that. And as I learned more about how to become a lawyer, I found that would definitely be something that would be a struggle. Whereas with tech, you can do both and you can do both really well. And so I think that's sort of how I meandered into becoming a tech person. And then I worked as a software engineer. I did some internships at Amazon and a few other companies. And then after graduating, I joined Microsoft and eventually moved on to Square. And in end of 2019, I left my job at Square and I was living in Kitchener, which is a smaller town outside of Toronto. And I wanted to move back to Toronto. That was the reason I left. Loved the company, loved the team, always rooting for them. But I just couldn't live in Kitchener anymore. It was like killing my soul. And so I moved back to Toronto and I was like, yay, I'm going to have a social life again. And the plan at that point was to get a good, stable job and then spend my evenings learning how to be an entrepreneur and maybe start dabbling and building something. The world had a different idea and sort of laughed at me because COVID entered the chat instead. And so that social life idea completely went out the door. And then I got a call from my dad kind of just saying, hey, we both know this is becoming a thing. And maybe you should consider coming back to Kenya for a little bit until everything calms down. And he said the magic words to me, which is if anything happens to him or my mom, or if anything happens to me and we're not together, that like, I don't want that. So I went back to Kenya. We thought it'd be 2 or 3 weeks. It ended up being 8 months of me being there. And that's when I was going through a lot of trying to figure out what I want to do now. And that's where a lot of realizations came up, where I was struggling with why I felt a little restless at my job in Square, which I didn't realize until then. And I was feeling restless because I was being pigeonholed to only be a developer. And I knew I could do more than being a developer. I had all of this business experience that I could already see being a huge benefit. And I know the people I worked with at Square saw that and knew that about me as well. And then I bit the bullet. There was a program called the On Deck Fellowship, it's still one of the best programs, I think, today. And I was accepted into ODF 4, which was the first virtual cohort because of COVID. And it completely transformed my life in terms of how I think about entrepreneurship and just throwing me into it with a really good sort of hand to guide me through those early stages. So that's how I ended up going from wanting to be a lawyer when I was 12 to a technical founder. And I think today, the technical part, while it's still there, I still code every now and then. I think it's all the other skills that are almost more important than the coding, because I can hire someone to do the coding and AI can do the coding for me as well. Let's not lie about this. But when it comes to understanding what to code and how to market it, or, with the family business, what are the problems they're facing for us to figure out what to build? I think those are becoming the more interesting challenges now.
That's
That was a
great.
very
Thank you
long
so
answer.
much for, yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I have so many follow-up questions to try and dig into a few different parts there. But let's start with ODF, right? On Deck is a very popular fellowship program. In your experience, what are some two or three things that was really impactful for you that you would say that this is one of the best programs?
Yeah. So, massive asterisks. The program has changed a lot since I was part of it. When I was there, it was fully virtual. Now they're focusing a bit more in person. So, for anyone listening, I think the foundations of what I mentioned are still true, but the program is run differently. I think one of the things they really focused on is curating a really talented group of people and bringing them together. I was in a cohort with the likes of Chris Messina, who is one of the leaders on Product Hunt. Like, if you want to post your product on Product Hunt, he's one of the people you want to try and get to help you. And I don't want to say I had easy access to him. That's not the right way to phrase it. What On Deck had curated was they would provide a certain amount of programming. So they would have incredible outside speakers come in and tell us things like how to figure out how to validate your product. I think we even had one of the founders from Superhuman come and teach us the product market fit concept. And then we had people from our community, like Chris Messina, come and do internal workshops based on their knowledge and their expertise. And I mentioned Chris Messina and Product Hunt in particular because I followed that guidebook to a T when I launched the first version of HypeDocs. I don't want to say how many years ago because it's a little embarrassing, but we ended up being one of the top three products of the day and actually won a grant from Product Hunt. And that would
It's
not have been
amazing.
possible if I hadn't had that kind of access or that knowledge and insight from someone like Chris Messina. Yeah.
That's great. You also spent some time at the University of Toronto's entrepreneurship team or the department. Did that play some sort of a support role? Can you tell us a little bit more about how that's helpful?
Yeah. So I think the way I did it looking back might have been a bit of a mistake. But I did a lot of the programs, which almost whichever program I could get into that was free and didn't require equity during COVID, because a lot of them were virtual and somewhat easy to join. I think each program was really valuable. The reason I say I think it was a bit of a mistake for me is I spend more time going through programming than I did on the startups or doing the validating and building. So something I'm trying to focus on right now is really scaling back and only going to things where I think there's an immediate value, which I can like quickly perceive. It's a thing, we all go through it. I like learning it. I think there's always something more I can learn, but at some point that trade-off point or that ROI is no longer there. U of T is actually one that I'm currently actively part of. I'm super fortunate that they actually offer office space, which is 10 minutes from where I live. So I'm
Nice.
able to go and work out of there. Whenever I need to, I can bring guests in so we can have like co working sessions and things like that. They have the program as it exists today. They offer so many different things. Like there's a whole lab area. I'm not a hardware founder, but if you're a hardware founder, they have
Yeah.
space for that. If you are doing stuff with food, if you want to record podcasts, if you have any sort of arts and crafts type of thing, and I don't want to demean it by saying arts and crafts, but if you're building physical products, they have space for that. Now they're leveraging the U of T network, so they've brought in a professor to come and give us startup advice and make sure that we're building in the right direction. And I think that's the kind of hands off but accessible hands on that I need at the stage that I'm at right now.
Got it. One thing I do want to emphasize is something that you said is that's very, very important, which is to not get lost in too much learning. That could really be a thing. You did share your experience about you spending a lot of time in programming rather than when I say programming, not writing code, but attending a lot of these workshops rather than building. But and that's applicable to so many different things as founders. Like a lot of hardcore technical founders spend way too much time continuing to build products and not talking to customers because that's comfort zone. Likewise, a lot of us might like going to these workshops to keep learning, but we are not launching. I've also experienced that events are similar where when you're new to a place and you're new to an industry, you start going to a lot of events. You will come across a time when you'll meet the same kind of people over and over again, and you will have similar learnings, right? And you need to be able to observe these things when they happen because it's very easy to sort of keep drifting along these things and lose focus. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to sort of bring it back. And so a lot of our listeners who might be in that stage, hopefully it strikes a bell.
Yeah, I would love to add something to that very quickly. I think you're touching on such an important point. Half of my founder friends and I talk about this all the time, where a year ago, especially as we came out of COVID and wanted that social connection again, I think I would be going to 4 or 5 events in a week, which is insane because that's 2 to 4 hours every
Right.
single day that I was at some sort of technical event. Luckily, the costs are negligible. A lot of these are free or like $10, $20. I can walk or take the subway to them. So it's easy for me because I live downtown. If you're living outside the city, that's an extra hour or 2 hours of commuting time that you're doing. For a certain period, it's really good to go for these because you can network and connect with people that you might not otherwise have access to. And sometimes going to these with that specific thought in mind is important. But I was definitely hitting a point where I just felt burnt out. Like going to event after event and then the next day being like, why am I not making any sales? Or why am I not making progress on this thing that I should be making progress on faster? And it's because I'm spending 4 hours out of my day at an event that's not really relevant to any of the stuff that I'm doing. And or maybe there is one event out of those four that is good in that week, but it's getting drowned out and I'm not able to action on any of those items that I should be focusing on. So in the last few months, I've been traveling. Like I was back home in Kenya for a little bit, but since I've been back, I think I've only been to 2 events in the last month and a half. And both of those events is I knew one of the speakers on the panel.
That's
And so
great.
it was part of, yeah. And literally the one I went to this week, as I walked into the door, I just felt this whoosh of, do I really have the energy to be here today? I'm really glad I stuck around and stayed at that event. It was excellent. The speakers were great. I asked a question to one of the speakers during the panel, and the answer that I got profoundly changed the way that I'm thinking about my IP strategy, which would not have happened if I hadn't gone there. I wouldn't have been in the right mindset if I had just been going to event after event. So just wanted to share that out with everyone.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing it. One of the things that I tell some of the founders that I've had a chance to mentor is to always go with some sort of a plan, and you don't have to sit through the entire event. If an event
Yes.
is 4 hours long, you pick what you want to do, walk out when you want to. And no, like in your case, you knew, you did the research to find out who's the speaker, what are they talking about, what is the question that I have that I want to get answered, right? And you want to be sure of what you want to do at the event. If it is networking, know with a goal, I want to meet 7 new people today who do XYZ, and maybe they'll be helpful in the future. Or I want to
Yeah.
meet 5 new people who could be potential customers, or I want to meet 2 new people who could be possibly mentors for me, whatever, right? Like think about what you are going to this event for instead of just
And
like
measure it.
mindlessly spending time and measure it. Yeah, that's great.
Measure it. Everything you said, put it in a spreadsheet and say, okay, this month my goal is to go to 4 events, and from those 4 events, I want to meet 5 potential customers, or I want to, X, Y, and Z, and measure it. And if you're not getting that outcome in that, because that's not your marketing strategy, move on. Find a different strategy instead.
That's great. I'm going to take a few steps back to one of the things that you mentioned in this answer also, but also when you were talking about your time moving back to Kenya. Post-COVID, the first year or two was really rough on so many people, depending on what part of the world you were in. The impact of that could have been felt significantly stronger. But overall, I think everybody would agree that that was one of the most difficult times in recent history. As founders, we go through a lot of mental health challenges. We rarely talk about it. One of the things I try to bring up on the show is to hear more perspectives. You mentioned briefly that you were going through that phase where you were also trying to understand who you are, what do you want to do. And as founders, that cycle keeps repeating. It's like even the most accomplished founders keep going back into the loop because there's more pressure on them. If you've had one startup exit or go IPO, the expectation is that the next one will be even a bigger IPO, right? So, what was going through your mind? Have you been able to work out some techniques that help you navigate these sort of days better?
So, such an important topic. The two things running through my mind is I want to share something that happened to me end of October last year. And then the second is it's not a plug for HypeDocs, which we will talk about, I'm sure, but I think it's a big reason that I'm focusing on HypeDocs because I think HypeDocs is a tool that can help people. track the things that they're good at, and we want to hype you. Like, we want to help you celebrate yourself in moments where you're not sure about that. So a lot of the experiences I've gone through are a reason that I keep pushing on and wanting to build HypeDocs. Now, going back to October last year, when you talk about having these like big moments, I was hitting a really tough moment. I had been working on HypeDocs for I think 2.5, maybe 3 years at that point, done a couple of major pivots. The latest pivot wasn't working. I think mentally I knew that months before, and I just wasn't willing to admit it yet. Or actually, I think I'd admitted it to myself very quietly, but I hadn't actioned on anything because I didn't know what to focus my time on next. And for me to say, okay, I'm not working on HypeDocs was fine. But to not have anything to say that I was working on, that was scary for me. And that's where I started going into that downward spiral of, okay, well, what am I doing with my time? And am I wasting it on HypeDocs? And I feel like a failure. And like all of those thoughts really had a hard time sort of hitting the end of October last year, going into November. I had a couple of conversations with some great people. Most of them are people that know me really well. And then there was one or two that I never met before. They were first conversations that I met through one way or another, but they were calls scheduled before I had this sort of mental break. And at that point, like after when the moment happened, I told myself I'm not going to do anything for the next 2 weeks. I will follow up with the calls I have scheduled, but I'm not going to do any active work. I'm not going to try to make any code changes or anything like that because mentally I'm not in a space to work on it anymore. I was doing client work, so I'll like build websites for other people, and that's how I make money on the side. So that at least like I wasn't worried about income or anything like that. But for HypeDocs in particular, I just stopped. And I had decided it was time to kill it, time to move on. And then in that 2 week period, I didn't do any work on it. I'd already mentally stopped working on it. And then I had a couple conversations, and I'm not going to name the people who said it because I think one or two of them are private, but some of the general things that they mentioned were I, in that moment, was trying to solve many big things with one answer. So, for example, what am I doing with my life? What should I be doing with HypeDocs? What am I doing with my partner? Because we're planning our lives with my partner as well. Should I spend more time in Kenya and helping with the family business, or should I keep working here? And those are all very scary, very big topics all at the same time. And a little part of that, not one that I personally felt too much, but I know a lot of people out there do, which is if I compare myself to another developer that's at the same level as me, and I see with developers, if you get the right deal and equity and things like that, you've probably got a good amount saved up. You've probably got one house, you've probably got an investment property. Quite a few of my friends have a kid or just got married or, X, Y, and Z. So a lot of that comparison starts coming out into these conversations. One friend told me very specifically, you're trying to solve all these really tough, hard questions with one answer. And there's no one answer that's going to solve this. And that one answer, like even if you found a part of an answer, it could change in 6 months. And that's okay. And so part of my like forcing myself to not do anything was to just watch TV. I watched Queen of the South, all 5 seasons, which is great because apparently I needed gore in that moment. But in the background, my mind started unraveling all these big things that I was going through and trying to figure out, okay, what is good about Kenya? What is good about Canada? What is good about my partner? Everything is good about him. What is good about HypeDocs or something else? And at that point, HypeDocs was out. Let's go and pursue this other idea that I had. And when I started untangling each one into its own thing, I started feeling a lot calmer. And I started identifying answers to some. And for others, it's like, I can't make a decision on this until I have until I have an answer to this other step first. And that's fine. But I started to feel a sense of control over my life again. And I then worked on a different idea. I told myself, and you touched on this earlier, I told myself I'm not going to write a single line of code until I've validated this or I have customers that are willing to pay for it. I spent a month validating it. It was an AI-powered software to help boards, like company boards. I'm on one board. I'm about to join a second one. I've gone through corporate board training, so I had a fair amount of knowledge in there, and AI can help with a lot of things. I was connected really quickly to some amazing people in like that are on some incredible boards, including someone who's on the Air Canada board and things like that. In that 1 month, it validated, do not build this. I am not the right person to build this. I have no joy building this. Right at the end of that, someone, very close friend of mine, was showing me something that he's been building. And that sparked so much joy in my heart again. And it gave me the inspiration for the version of HypeDocs that I'm working on today and that we've launched, which is using audio input as a way to get you to write journals or to say your journals. It's a lot of therapy by just word vomiting what's on your mind. Clearly, I do a lot of that. And then our AI prompts right now will go and analyze what you're saying and surface a lot of the small wins that you're not thinking about from just whatever you've shared about your day. There's a lot of things we're going to be adding on, obviously, especially after the IP strategy thing I mentioned earlier. But that moment for me was probably one of the most pivotal moments where it could have gone either direction. I could have kept pounding the pavement and kept pushing myself to go through this in a really painful way. Or I could have done what I'm fortunate I did do, which is rely on my friends and my network, listen to their advice, and slowly, I don't have answers to all those questions yet, but slowly start answering the ones I could control and get back to a place where I feel really good and happy with the choices I'm making and with the work that I'm doing, both actual work and, the things I'm doing outside of my day job as well.
That is great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Ashni. And it's amazing to see how HypeDocs came into existence and is also solving some of the things that we were just chatting about with mental health. And this, we are part of this tech industry where there's a lot of the tech bro culture. As a woman entrepreneur, how have you been sort of navigating that? And I've read your journey a little bit, and it also said about you being in that place where HypeDocs became an idea because there is enough evidence to show that women more often don't think that they've done something significant, whereas men tend to be able to showcase more than what they have actually done. And that we've seen so much data being shared about applying to jobs. If you see a job description, more men would apply even if they don't meet the criteria, and
Yeah.
more women would choose not to apply even if they miss out on one or two criteria because they think they would not meet the requirement, right? And how is all of that playing a role as you are navigating your journey in the tech space, but also how is HypeDocs helping other women to find their way forward?
Yeah. Great, great set of questions. I have many thoughts on this. I'm sure you can guess that. From my childhood, I was never told I couldn't do anything because I'm a girl. I was always pushed and encouraged to try and do whatever it is I was interested in. I had issues doing certain things, but that was not because of my gender. That was because of other issues out there in the world. One of them, very transparently, being my weight. I was always a heavier person, which is another thing that founders will deal with or struggle with in a variety of ways. I was given a lot of confidence, or I had a lot of confidence growing up, and that translated really well into me joining the workforce here in Canada. I'm also super aware of the privilege I had that I could go to a university like University of Toronto, study computer science there. It's a world-renowned university, and I'm not saying that to pamp my ego, but rather to just emphasize why it's a privilege. Because if I submit my resume for jobs and they see U of T, they're going to rank it a lot higher than if you say some other smaller college or online learning. And it's just a fact. I'm also super fortunate that I was able to get internships every summer that I was in university. Some of those might not have been your traditional internship, but I learned how to talk about them in ways that showed what I learned and how I apply them to my next job. My first ever internship was between first and second year, and I got it through a network. Like I got the introduction through a network. Actually, my cousin saw a posting in a Facebook group she was on and sent it to me. And the role was a software engineering intern in a company in Java, Indonesia. And I went. It wasn't your traditional job. The only other developer on the team did not speak English, and it was him, me, and the founder. And so it was a lot of really learning how to do things that luckily I could figure out the code. It was learning how to communicate and work with the team. That became super helpful when I applied for Amazon as the next year for that internship, or maybe it was 2 years later, because I remember distinctly sharing that story with the interviewer, and he just started laughing and then wrote like a massive check. Like I saw him physically do a massive check mark kind of thing, and that helped me get that job. And
Nice.
so I super lucky to have that confidence from an early age and then get these. And I want to be very clear here. I say luck, but a lot of this was hard earned as well. Because a lot of women, and I need to correct myself here as well, a lot of women will use language like, I was lucky to get this job. No, I might have had privilege, but I also earned the position and I worked really hard in that. So for any of the women listening out there, any of the minority groups, anyone who falls into any category really, where you feel like you're struggling, you have that power and that ability to like you can work. And I'm trying to say this in a good way without, I think I'm going about it the wrong way. You have earned the position that you're at right now. So don't let anyone ever come and tell you, oh, you lucked into it. Somebody else should have earned it or someone else deserved it better than you. That's not true. From there, because I had great companies like Amazon and eventually Microsoft and Square on my resume, I'm fortunate to say, like, even during COVID, and I think to some extent even now, I do get recruiters reaching out and being like, hey, we want you. Or, like I'll get the standard email from Google every year being like, hey, we want to interview you, come join us. And very flattering. At one point in my life, that was exactly what I wanted. Today, it's not what I want anymore. That has been my journey. I know that's not everyone's journey. I just want to be very transparent on how I answer this. I think for a lot of women who especially grew up in North America, that's not the case. You're kind of conditioned. Actually, I don't even want to pigeonhole it to North America. A lot of women are not encouraged to do math or to do these problem solving things at a younger age. You're not given some of those confidence building things from a younger age unless it's about beauty or being cute and things like that, which helps you build confidence in other aspects of your life, but maybe not in the career side of things. And that's where a lot of these mishaps happen. The same way I corrected myself during our conversation just now with the luck conversation, that's something I actively do with every single person and every single woman I speak with. When they share their story, I was at a conference, a women software engineering conference, and there were 5 of us speaking, and I was the last one to go. And instead of explaining who I was, I remember telling each of them, the 4 of you just use the word luck, saying you're lucky you got the scholarship to come here. You're lucky that your school is covering the cost to come here. You're lucky that you got accepted into X, Y, and Z. No, you're not lucky. You earned that. The amount of work it takes to apply, like anyone can apply for that scholarship. Not everyone does. And so a lot of it is just like really trying to rebuild women's confidence in themselves. And I think that translates really well into my goal and my vision with HypeDocs, which is I want people, and it's not just about women, it's people. I want people to rebuild their confidence in themselves and to remember, yes, the world is shitty. There's a lot of things going on right now. The job market sucks, the economy sucks, it's unreliable, X, Y, and Z, I could go on. But there are things in your control, and you can celebrate your small wins, and those small wins turn into bigger wins. And let's use that to rebuild your confidence, and let's use that to help you get or build the life that you want. And that's sort of the reason that I'm so passionate about getting HypeDocs to work in some capacity.
That is amazing, Ashni. Thank you so much for sharing all of that in so much detail. One last question before I let you go. You mentioned a little bit about your ability to see forward a little bit. We are recording this at a time when we are potentially at the peak of a global trade war. I'm hoping it's the peak and it gets better from here, but you never know. What are you seeing happen over the next 3 to 5 years? You could answer this more specifically to Hype Docs or your space, but generally, what has been your reading of how all of this is going to shape out over the next 5 years?
I don't want anyone coming back to me in 5 years and being like, you guessed this and you were so wrong. So please don't do that, anybody. Um, there's so many trends that you can look at right now. Some are scary, some are exciting. I'll start with the scary so we can end on a more positive note. Scary is obviously the markets are extremely unreliable right now. As a business owner, as a human, just trying to buy milk. I think I saw a story about eggs in the US costing like $5 or $8 or something, which is insane. Because if you can't predict what your general cost of living is, and you're a person on a lower income bracket or like a tight income bracket, and it's not just low income folks. There are folks who might make $100,000, but they've got debts they're paying off, their mortgage. I don't want to play a small violin for anybody, but everyone is struggling, and most people are struggling in some way. It's really hard to predict how your spending is, what your monthly spending should look like, what happens with mortgage rates and interest rates and all that stuff. We saw that happen in a big way in COVID, where a lot of this is not financial advice. Nobody take this as financial advice. But we saw a lot of this struggle happen in COVID where the mortgage rates dropped and then they suddenly started rising up like crazy. And here in Canada, quite a few people were on variable rates, and it went from like 1% to 5, 6, 7%. And those are insane changes to your spending. And the reason I'm focusing on this so much is the first thing you need to figure out as a human is, how am I going to be able to live? And unfortunately, that really means, how do I afford to live with the conditions that are in control right now?
And
The
for
other big
survival.
issue, exactly. One of my favorite things my dad taught me years ago was, it is really hard to make your first $1 million. It is really easy to make your second million. We might need to adjust those numbers for inflation, but the general idea there is, when you're making your first million, you're still in survival mode. Once you're out of that and you're making your second million, you're using your money to make more money. And that becomes so much easier. Yes, it's risky, but you're not in survival mode anymore if you're smart and strategic with how you do it. So coming back to trends and what I'm, seeing, there's a group of women I'm in a WhatsApp group with, and we had a long chat yesterday where one of the girls asked, or one of the women asked, can anyone give me tips on data analytics as a profession? My partner has spent the last 2.5 years going through the education of data analytics, and is fortunately has a job, a good steady job that's paying him for that role. But if you look at what that role is going to look like in the next year, not even 5 years, in the next year, it's not the traditional write a SQL statement. If your company is still doing traditional write a SQL statement, I would hop out and I would find a different one, to be honest, because they're not thinking forward. And the reason I'm highlighting that is, if you look at the job market as it is today, you're going to miss out on what you actually need to spend the next 6 months learning. Yes, some amount of that should be on analytics if that's your interest, but there's so many other things that you would need to prove or to show a hiring manager that you are the best candidate for the job, and it's not going to be your junior entry level data analytics skills. So how can you think about that and bring that into the fold of what you're trying to transition or change into your career? I applaud her, and anyone else that's doing this, because it's a huge thing right now. It's a necessary thing right now, because a lot of people have to change their jobs, have to change the way they think about living. Conversation my partner and I had today, which was, the traditional 9 to 5 is not attractive anymore. My partner literally said earlier today, I was so happy before with just doing a standard 9 to 5 job and just writing that through and retiring at some point. I don't want to do that anymore. And part of that is because I've been showing him what these AI tools can do with the coding tools and building products. And he sees what my lifestyle is like with building my startup. And some weeks I'll just be like, I'm done, and I'll watch TV for the week, or I'll travel for the week. And I think that, like, being able to live and want to live your life again and not be a slave behind a desk 24/7 is becoming a bigger trend right now. So that's sort of the negative swinging into a more neutral. And then from a positive perspective, AI is obviously the really big topic. And I think we've done a lot, but I still feel like we're scratching the surface. Do I want to see the iRobots come and take over the world? No. Are we heading in that direction? Probably. But I think there's really positive opportunities where you think about medicine, where you think about climate, where you think about, how do we solve these massive issues that we've created in the world in a scalable way, or in a fiscally responsible way, or in a sustainable way. And that last part is the most important, because if you can solve something for one person, doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. So how can we do that to help everybody? Like with something as basic as food. I will stop there for now because I could go on, but
Thank
yeah.
you so much, Ashni, for sharing all of that, for sharing your journey throughout, from your childhood as well as your entrepreneurship journey, but also so many different perspectives around growing your career, watching out for what's coming up next. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I'm pretty sure our listeners are going to enjoy it as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me. And to everyone tuning in, please don't come find me in 5 years and quote this, but definitely come and find me. I'm always happy to chat.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Ashni.
And that wraps up today's episode. Before we sign off, I would like to thank you for your support and thanks for tuning in. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Be kind, be happy, challenge the norm. I'll see you folks again for the next one.